Hello, everyone, and welcome to the September 2021 RELO Andes webinar. I am Rachel Martin. I am so glad you are here. If you are joining us live, remember that we can see the comments, so please say hi, tell us where you're viewing from. If you're watching this on replay, we still come back and look at the comments later. This month, we do have this webinar every month, but today, I am not up here alone. I am joined by a friend and a colleague. So we're going to bring her up on screen. I want to introduce all of you to Amy King. Amy is a super experienced English teacher and curriculum developer. She's a RELO Andes English language specialist who's working on a couple really cool projects with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rachel. So before we get started, though, isn't there an announcement that you wanted to make?
We do have an announcement. So if you've been watching the webinars recently, or if you've been following any of the RELO Andes social media channels, you know that we have a conference coming up. This is the Re-Evolution 2.0. It's the second year we are hosting a virtual conference for English language educators all over the world. And today we get to show you a video. I have it right over here. We can show you a video about the conference schedule. Now available, the full Re-Evolution 2.0 conference schedule available for your time zone. We will start on Friday, October 1st with opening remarks by U.S. Ambassador to Peru, Ambassador Lisa Kenna. This will be followed by concurrent workshop sessions and a keynote that you are not going to want to miss. On Saturday, October 2nd, there will be activities from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. GMT -5. However, we know that Saturdays are busy, so show up for the ones that work for you. On Sunday, we're starting off with the keynote at 9:30 a.m. for our friends in Peru and Ecuador. This will be followed by workshops and closing remarks at 3:15. However, the conference will stay open until 8 p.m. So if there was a workshop session you missed, come watch it on replay or pay another visit to the organizations in the expo hall. The best way to see the schedule is on the Hopin event page. That is where you signed up for your tickets, and in Hopin, the schedule will always be in your time zone. That's all the news for now. We'll see you October 1st, 2nd, and 3rd as we go beyond the screen. Okay, so I hope you have signed up for your tickets. If you're planning to go to the conference, you can tell us over here in the chat, and let's say hello to a few people. Let's see, we have Elena from Trujillo, Janet from Peru. Looks like we have Nancy. It's so good to have you here, and I love that we see so many names coming back month after month. It's always the third Thursday. We love to have you here. So Amy, what is our topic for today?
So yeah, I forgot to give a little intro myself before we saw the video there. We're going to be talking about texts. And this is really a structure that you can use with any grade level, with any proficiency level. And it's designed to get students really interested in reading, moving past that frustration and having the opportunity to be more fully engaged because they're working in small groups.
All right, well, take it away. I want to hear about this.
Great, thanks. So a little bit about me before we get started. Rachel mentioned that, and I guess I didn't introduce myself necessarily again. Amy King is my name, and I am working as a specialist in Peru with the RELO Andes group. But I was in Vietnam last year as a fellow, and so this is a little tracking of my progress from Hanoi, Vietnam. And that's me. It's a kind of small picture of me, but my Vietnamese colleagues were really concerned about my health amid all the COVID scares. So they came and gave me a little farewell party and stocked me up with hand sanitizer and rubber gloves and masks. And in the last minute, they said, I think you should wear a raincoat. And it confused me a little bit, but sure enough, their idea was these little rain ponchos that are available in any little corner store right near my house. So I'm back now in the States. I'm in the state of Missouri, and I've kind of pointed out where that is. It's right in the middle of the U.S., and I live in Kansas City, and that is the picture there is just an image of the skyline here in Kansas City. So enough about me. I would like to hear a little bit about you. want to do a quick check-in here that hopefully will be a little bit of fun. So those are numbered 1 through 9. Looks like some of the numbers are a little bit difficult to read, but we're going 1 to 3 across the top. So take a moment, see if any of those animal faces represent how you're feeling. And if you want to add why that's so, please feel free to do that too.
And while you were introducing yourself and your travels all the way around the world and back, we've had people say hello to us from Algeria, from Argentina.
Wow.
Oh, yes, lots of places coming in here. I'm looking at those pictures. I'm just drawn to number 5 because I love dogs. I don't know that I'm actually feeling quite that happy-go-lucky today. What about you, Amy? Which one are you
thinking?
thinking?
I'm the seal. I'm up at the top. I'm really excited. My hair is slicked back and I'm ready to go.
There you go. There you go. Okay. And
right.
I saw we had a shout out there to Wilma in Bolivia. Great to have you with us.
Perfect. All right. So we're going to start out with an overview of this idea of reading circles. So I want to pause just now to kind of set this up. This structure is often referred to as literature circles. Rachel and I were talking and decided we wanted to modify that slightly. I'm going to share some resources with you at the end of our session today. And a lot of the resources there will reference literature circles because they are typically used with some kind of literature. But you don't have to. You can use any kind of text you want. You could use books. We'll talk more about this later, but you could use a short text. You could use informational text. And all of that is part of what's so flexible about this structure. But basically, it is designed to get students engaged in discussions about something that they've read. Part of it includes the fact that students assume different roles. And we'll talk in detail about that a little bit later. And it's also that those roles are designed to ensure accountability. And also, although as you begin, you may provide less choice than you do later on, but it is also designed to promote student choice and student voice. So they're improving their reading skills, their comprehension skills, but they're also improving listening and speaking skills because they're talking to each other about what they've read. So a little what it is not, what it is versus what it is not. So it is student-centered rather than teacher-directed, based on choice most of the time. We'll discuss that a little bit as we go along. So it's not necessarily rigidly assigned. Sometimes in the beginning, you may want to organize groups yourself, but over time, ideally students are kind of self-grouping based on the text that they choose to read. So it is designed for accountability, not just unstructured turn and talk, and guided by students' questions and inquiry rather than yours as the teacher.
Now, can I jump in here with a question? You were saying how we had talked about the different names and, reading circles, literature circles. I've always called them lit circles, but my background is a lot with secondary. So I think they're trying to make it sound fun for them.
I like that.
I've used these before in a face-to-face classroom. Does this work online?
Great question. Yes, absolutely. It just would depend on what your system is set up. But you could put students, rather than them sitting in a circle face to face, they could be working in a breakout room of some kind. Great question. All right, so why would we do this? So it's promoting cooperative learning. And I will say at the start, it's not something that's going to happen immediately. You'll have to do some guidance, some modeling, give time students to practice. But they are working together, using each other's resources, and hopefully becoming more independent learners. And providing that choice is going to hopefully provide more opportunities for them to make connections to what they're reading, how it connects to their own life or their personal experiences. It's going to increase that intrinsic motivation, and hopefully they'll be much deeper engaged in those discussions with their peers. And you're expecting students to do a lot of talking. So I always say a noisy classroom is a good classroom if students are trying to learn a language. So they're going to have plenty of opportunities to share their experiences and feelings, and then also debate and argue ideas. All of that will be largely based on the text that you choose, whether that's actually in a written form or maybe it's a video or a short subject animated film. And then the last thing is that they're designed to be fun. And I think it's important to mention here, that's especially if you are doing some differentiation. So this comes back to the idea of choice. I think it's always great to offer student choice, but we want to make sure that we're providing them options that are appropriate for their proficiency levels and that are also going to be of interest to them in terms of the content. Having students spending lots of time in small groups allows you as the teacher to wander around, to listen in, and to provide support that's just right and just in the moment as needed. All right, so getting started. I'm going to give you a brief 4-step process. Starting with
I love a checklist. You got to have a
I was going to say my countdown is only 3, 2, 1. I've got 4 steps here, but anyway. So one of the ideas is to start, when you're starting to do this, to build excitement with the students with something that they refer to as a book talk, which we'll talk about more in a minute.
Okay.
Providing that choice within some reason. And I think that's not to say that they could read anything, but like, hey, from these 5 books, which would you prefer to use? And then providing support to students. I think this can come in the form of doing some modeling, doing some read aloud, think aloud, where you're modeling how to read aloud, but also what's happening in your brain as you're reading. And then the 4th one is that critical development of roles. Now, there are plenty of resources out there for you to use that are already developed, but I think over time, you may wish to add some of your own roles, and that will probably be connected really closely to the kinds of texts students are reading. So these are short presentations. It's not like a formal book report. It's supposed to be more persuasive than expository. And it's kind of a commercial for a book. And you could highlight whatever you think is interesting in that book. It might be it might be the setting. It might be the plot. It might be an interesting character. It might be something about the mood of the book if it's kind of a scary book. So you want to start with a hook to get them interested. Needs to be really pretty short. And you want to be pretty sure that it's going to be a book that students will be interested in. Try to engage your audience, bring your personality, and leave them wanting more. So they're really excited about the possibility of reading that book.
So I can see this book talk part is kind of individual, but then the rest of it's going to be collaborative. The reason I ask is we have a question over here in the comments, and I don't know if you want to answer this now or if you're going to get to this as you talk some more.
Sure, no, go ahead.
So it's up on the screen here. Mary Carmen is asking, what can I do if the students are asked to work collaboratively, but they just split up the activity and they end up doing the work individually?
So I think that when we look at some of these role worksheets where they're assigned a role and they're being asked to do things, they are having to talk and communicate to each other. But that's a great question. I think you could also set it up that they're having to produce something together. I'll show you on one of the resources. I didn't include this in the presentation, but there's an idea to, like, once they have finished whatever they're reading, to have some kind of a celebration that could be that culminating activity. And that would require, everybody to participate in some way. But that's a great question. And yes, so thanks for asking that, Rachel, because when you're starting out, I would recommend that you as teachers are doing these book talks and you're trying to get the students interested. Over time, they may be doing the same thing. That also could be a culminating activity if you wanted to, for, encouraging another group to read the book that my group has just read. All right, great questions. Thank you so much. So some considerations here. And I mentioned this earlier. I think we're thinking of texts rather broadly or loosely. Could be any of these things. Essentially, it's some kind of English language input, and then the students are having the opportunity to talk about it.
And I love that you expanded it out to all of those things, because when I see that, it makes me think we could use this with a lot of different audiences, different levels, students who have, different goals, whether they're reading chapter books and literature, or whether they're wanting to read the newspaper, or journals in their field, something, very English for specific purpose-y, maybe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So connected to that, I think these sometimes are these ideas here are maybe connected to proficiency levels for students, but just some additional considerations.
Yeah.
And I think too, it's an important point, I think, to stop and say, if we're doing this in a distance environment, we're also probably going to want to have some kind of digital access to digital materials or digital texts. And then the last, and I think I've kind of talked about this, but thinking about what students are interested in, that's one of the greatest motivators for reading, and their proficiency levels. If there are some particular content topics that you think are important for them, depending on your context and that text type. So moving on, I mentioned this kind of up at the top about doing some modeling and then providing some support. So let's look at these ideas here. As I mentioned earlier, it's not something that will automatically happen. You will have to do some introductions to how this works, what your expectations are. You might do some modeling of what a text read aloud is like. I mentioned the read aloud, think aloud too. So that could be part of the introduction of these worksheets where they're having to fill these things out. And I'll show you some examples of those when we look at the resources I have available for you. But that's modeling the different roles, how they're supposed to complete these worksheets. And then there's just other social things like taking turns and how do we do that? And this concept of holding the floor, which just means, it's kind of a funny idiom, but it's sort of like giving me a little time to think about, I'm thinking, but I don't want people to start talking. So I need to hold the floor. I need to do some kind of gesture. This is a typical one. You see, I'm doing it automatically, like, just give me a few minutes to think before you start.
Yeah.
And then just other kinds of questions and how you ask clarifying questions or how you can respectfully disagree. And we'll talk about that too. So I also shared a resource on the Padlet site that I created that mentions this idea of accountable talk. And I don't think this is something separate from reading circles. I think it's what you want to happen. And I do think it gets to the point that was made earlier about making sure that all the students are engaged. And some of the roles are designed to do that so that all the students are engaged. But accountable talk is just a term that's used to let students know that you want them all to participate and how they might participate. So introducing it as such that, we're going to do these reading circles. Everybody's accountable for engaging in the discussion. Give them some practice, and you can just supply these cards. So I have done some screenshots here. I do have all of these cards on the Padlet site for you all that you can download and use as you like. And then
just to clarify for our viewers, we are going to be sharing the link for this Padlet site, right?
yes, we are at the end. And I don't think I
stick around to the end of the presentation, and we'll be putting the link to a lot of these resources that Amy is showing us right now.
And I'll do a little quick walkthrough of everything for you at that time too. So then you could just have students practice using these frames just to get, familiar with them before they are actually engaged in a discussion. And then you could have a group. I don't know if this is a familiar term, but it's called a fishbowl. And it's a great way to model, to have students kind of model what you want them to do. So the idea is that a group of students have volunteered to use these accountable talk cards to respond to an open-ended question. So as the teacher, I'm going to pose a question, and then the rest of the class can stand around and watch this smaller group engage in this conversation. That's called a fishbowl. So that could be one way to get them started with this idea of reading circles and accountable talk within those. I also added some additional frames that might be more focused on an actual book, depending on what you're having your students read. Some of those accountable talk cards could be used for any kind of discussion that students have. All right, so let's take a little bit of time to look at some common roles. If you do a search on literature circles, you'll find lots of resources. I've added a bunch of them that I think are really effective to the Padlet site that we'll be looking at in a bit. So one of them is a facilitator. Sometimes this is called like a discussion leader. They might be the ones who are going to begin the conversation with a thought-provoking question. They could be the person that's ensuring that there's sort of equal airtime, as we say, that everybody is contributing and participating. They're kind of the cheerleader for the team too, and then working to ensure that everyone is staying on task. The connector, and sometimes this is called the reflector, but research on reading comprehension has shown that if you're helping students think about making connections as they read in these three ways. So this idea of text to self. So what am I reading that makes sense to me in my life or connects to my experiences or my understanding or my feelings about something? And the next one is text to world, and that's just what I'm reading in the text. What does it connect to what I know about in the outside world? And then text to text is a connection between what I'm currently reading or watching and something I've seen before or read before. So these are three common connections that they talk about that are designed to really increase students' comprehension. Now this one, it's got a very fancy title, the literary luminary.
The literary luminary.
Yeah.
That's kind of fun to say.
It's kind of fun to say. And the idea is that this probably would only make sense in the context of some kind of fiction or literature.
Okay.
Because you're really trying to look at quotes or passages that stand out for you in some way. I think of this as also being connected to kind of maybe the author's style. So that probably would not work as well for nonfiction. Another one is travel tracer, and this could be used in a variety of ways. So the idea is that maybe they're keeping track of the different locations or the different times, or maybe even shifts in a character's behavior or attitudes. And they are tasked with describing each of those or keeping track. They might do like a timeline of some sort. They could use words or visuals to record that information. I think this one would work nicely with nonfiction. I think it's also could be really helpful depending on what you're asking students to think about and think about the reliability of what they're reading. If they're noticing bias in there, is there additional information that I could provide to my team about the background information that would make something more understandable to them in the story? And they're doing a little bit of research and they're just presenting it informally. They don't have to do a major presentation, but they might just say something like, if it's Huckleberry Finn, for example, Mark Twain's from the state where I am, need to know about the Mississippi River, or maybe just information that would help to provide some context for other students. And a word wizard. So this person could be looking for words for a variety of reasons. I've provided a few suggestions here, but they're going to share those with the group and provide explanation of why they chose that word. So maybe it's because they think it's a really difficult word. They want to share it with the rest of the group. They may be talking about some of the underlying meanings of the words or those connotations that might have an impact on the text that they're reading. And then this one is a little bit like the literary luminary. So thinking about figurative language, and that probably, again, is only going to be something.
Language finder. Okay. You
Yes.
didn't tell me there were going to be tongue twisters today.
Yeah, I should have given you a little time to practice in advance, right? So these are some ideas about things that they might be looking for. And you can also see, I think this one particularly makes connections to investigating and thinking about language and the way writers are using language that can help to improve and influence students' writing. So I mentioned earlier the ideas that I think is great they're reading, improving their comprehension. They're getting practice speaking and listening. And ultimately, you could do some extension activities and have them do some writing based on what they read. And then our last one here of the ones that I'm going to share is a recorder. And this is just kind of somebody that's kind of keeping track of what we talked about. How many pages did we read? What are we reading next? And could kind of summarize the discussion.
So this was very interesting. I think I'm really used to putting students into small groups. I mean, all the teachers that I talk with, they use small groups, but we often default to the same, 3 or 4 group roles. these were really different. There's, I think you had, what, 6 or 7 here, and they were not the same old group roles that students have been using forever and might be a little bored with. This kind of shakes it up a bit.
Shake it up. I think you could also, another interesting activity would have students start to develop. What roles would you like to see, or what roles do you think we need for this text too? So that is getting at that choice as well. So
especially once they're used to the format a little bit.
Absolutely. All right. So here's some, going to run through these kind of quickly. This is a little bit of a repeat, a little bit of a review of lots of the things we've talked about, but over time, letting students choose what they read. And as I mentioned, that's could be within certain parameters. And this too, not the same roles, not the same groups. I think that's also a nice way to have students engage more instead of kind of congregating with their friends that they're used to working with. Different groups for different books for different groups. And that there is some kind of regularity to this routine, and that will help develop their expertise in engaging in it over time. And hopefully they'll be looking forward to, oh, it's reading circle time. The roles are helping them guide the reading and discussion. Topics and questions come from students. There is some direction to some of the roles, but and that they're really just having natural conversations. So there can make personal connections. There's a little bit of interplay, over talks maybe sometimes. And then
I hate to interrupt you, but we have kind of a question or a comment down here about how could this highlight students building their skills with summarizing? Because I know summarizing is such an important skill in general for reading, but also for exams they might need to take in English. How does that connect to this sort of discussion?
So I think that's a great point to make. And I forgot to mention this a little bit earlier. One other strategy, I mean, you could always have a summarizer, and you could set the routine up so that was rotating, like for this temporary time that this group of 4 students are together, they're going to have to rotate. And maybe that's so the recorder is keeping track of the roles as well, so that they're shifting around. And I also think another good way to get started, and especially if summarizing is a really important skill, which I believe it is, but that you might introduce a role at a time. And you might introduce summarizer as the role that everybody is going to do. And then over time, practice different roles so that students get more familiar with their expectations or what you're expecting from them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for adding that on. And
so you as the teacher are kind of just the facilitator. You can join groups, depending on what you think is appropriate, I guess I should say. And I didn't include a lot of ideas about evaluation necessarily. I think having students talk about how they did, you could do some group evaluation tools, thinking about how do we work together as a group, but hopefully they're having fun. And so here are some ideas about hopefully what you will see when you start doing this. Lots of animated talking, writing and drawing, stopping to talk about difficult words, revisiting the book. Oh, remember when? Everybody's sharing. Maybe social skills that you might monitor. And I think over time, this will diminish. But as you're wandering around, thinking about these different things here. Notion of eye contact. Talked about that disagreeing respectfully. And then hopefully you'll be seeing lots of these thinking skills in action.
So it seems like this is giving students a kind of prepared formula or a routine to go beyond just, I read the text, I summarized what the main characters did, and then I'm done. Like, this is how you make it richer beyond that even a bit.
Yeah, just surface comprehension, exactly.
So we have a question down here. Yeah, I see it too, about if you have a group of 5 students. So just to clarify, let me make sure I understood this, because it's how I've done it before. They do the reading of the actual book outside of group time. That has to happen separate from when they meet, right?
Yes. Ideally, that's the case. Yes. I would say that, depending on the proficiency level of students, and I don't know what, class time is like, but you could provide a little bit of class time for them to read as well, if that's possible. But ideally, they're reading it independently, and they're kind of assigned a certain amount to read, and then they'll come back and using these roll sheets, have a conversation about what they read.
Great.
And the last thing that I will leave you with in the slides here, and I think I've kind of hit on quite a few of these throughout this time we've talked.
Look familiar.
But yeah, it sounds familiar. Great. So that leads us to the Padlet resources. And let me just see here. I need to pop something up really quick here and copy that link. I didn't copy it before we got started, but I can pop that into the chat box really quickly. Hopefully, she said optimistically.
There we go.
All right. And
so we'll get that going up here, and we'll make sure we add it on to the comments. If it's not showing up at this exact moment, we'll get it out there into the Facebook and into the stream
to you there.
But what do you have on that Padlet?
So here is what we're going to take a look at here. In the first column there are some readings. Mm-hmm. And the top one, I didn't focus a lot on this, but it really, I mean, we talked a little bit about how to do it virtually, but this one really gives you some more ideas about that. And just some other readings here, ways that you can share books. Those are included there. Oh, I need to be clicking on the right place here. Sorry. There is a little lesson planner here that can kind of help you outline how you could get set up for that. Then in this column here, these are, I'm going to show just a few of these to you here, hopefully, because these give you some information at the top. So this is for the students. This is what they would be doing their work on or recording their work on, but it explains at the top what they're being asked to do. And I can make that a little bit bigger maybe for you all here. And some of these that I've shared here are a little bit different than some of the other ones that we looked at. So those are there for you. These are the accountable talk cards that I mentioned, and it is kind of a template because down at the bottom, they have them for you to fill in if you want to add your own there.
And I found talk cards like that to be so helpful for students in face-to-face classes. I imagine even just using it in an online class as something that you reviewed as sentences, have these in hand. You don't need to invent your own sentence frame or way to start.
Exactly.
You can, I'm confused. Would you mind explaining? That puts into words what someone might be feeling.
Exactly. All right, and I will scroll down. There are some sentence starters too that are basically the same thing, just in a kind of a slightly different format. Okay. Then I also added some videos here so that you can see, and I included ones at different levels. I included ones that had some information from a teacher about how she set it up, give some really good tips and ideas for that. Different class levels, from elementary to middle to secondary. I don't think I have any at the higher ed level, and then the last column is just a list of free digital resources with texts and other information that might be helpful, including the one at the top there, which is audio, a radio lab, that they're really interesting, always really interesting stories. So that's it for me. If there are other questions or comments.
And while we're checking the comments over here to see what comes in, I do want to remind people that we'll be having a discussion group tomorrow. If you're watching this live, we usually have a discussion group for the RELO Andes webinars one day after we air. So check out the RELO Andes Facebook page for that. You need to sign up on the Google Forms, and then you'll receive a Zoom link. Also, there it is right there. So Friday, September 17th at 2 p.m. in Peru and Ecuador. Add some time on there. We always have people from all over. I want to highlight, we started out with the announcement about it, but the Re-Evolution ELT.com. The conference is coming up really soon. So that is October 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. The schedule is on the registration page now, and everyone is invited. So I really want to thank Amy for being here today. It's been great to have a guest on here that can share, this is something that we're all doing. We're hoping our students develop their comprehension skills. But like you said, it was really integrating kind of all 4 of the skills, the talking, the turn taking, the interaction with the reading. This is a activity I need to be using more in my classes. So thank you for this advice.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and thank you so much for inviting me. So happy to come back anytime.
I'll hold you to that. You heard it here, folks. All right. We'll see you back here next month and at the Re-Evolution Conference before then. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for watching the RELO Andes webinar for September 2021.